Welcome back to this week's episode of Promising Young Surgeon. I'm your host, Dr. Frances Mei Hardin. Today, I would like to share a few words with you all before we get started. And, I've talked about this before on my show, but my ENT residency experience made me feel like I really was not good at anything anymore. And so I came out of training very beaten down, lacked a lot of confidence, even though I'd been historically a very confident person who loved learning, loved trying new things and gaining new skills. And so this past year, podcasting, creating and bringing Promising Young Surgeon to life has really helped me to remember who I really am. This person who loves to learn new things and can be good at mastering those. So I just want to remind you all of the power of putting yourself out there and trying new things, even if you've been beaten down in the past by some difficult, situations. And so again, I just want to thank you for being on this ride with me for the past year. Today, this is our 52nd episode of Promising Young Surgeon. It's officially been a year of the show, and today is our final episode. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for tuning in, and you can always connect with me online or find me on my new show launching this spring, Surgeon Interrupted. Allow me to introduce our guest for today, Dr. Adiba Matin. She grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, where a passion for science and medicine was sparked by her late father, who was a medical researcher. She pursued her undergraduate studies at the University of Chicago, earning a degree in biological sciences. And following her undergraduate education, she then attended the University of Missouri, Kansas City School of Medicine, where she joined AOA and was elected nationally as a delegate to the American Academy of Medical Colleges. She there represented medical students in student affairs. During her residency at the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Matin not only excelled clinically, but also worked in Bolivia and Bangladesh, focusing on improving emergency medicine education and infrastructure. She was selected to participate in the Resident Leadership Academy and served on the ABC News Medical Unit, where she gained experience in medical communications. With special interests in medical ethics, international medicine, and the impact of climate change on emergency medicine, Dr. Matin is dedicated to advancing global healthcare initiatives and addressing the challenges facing medicine today. Adiba, welcome to Promising Young Surgeon. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you and have a great conversation.
Well, I love that, again, to set the scene for everyone, we're both, I would classify us as early career attendings, at that point in our journey. And what I think is really special is how increasingly attendings are sharing their stories early on in their journey, as opposed to what historically has been out there, which is either very little raw storytelling and information about the journey. What I think is really powerful is that instead of waiting until retirement age to publish a memoir or to kind of speak out about some of the issues that face trainees and young docs today, there are increasingly physicians like yourself who are really vocal, excellent role models for the next generation.
Yeah. And I think that, things like talking about it on podcasts, what you're doing here, is really important in terms of changing the culture of what we allow in residency. And, I've been fortunate enough to have a really good support group and a really, amazing friendship circle and amazing mentors that have told me, the things that sometimes we encounter at work as women or as minorities or, whatever marginalized group you want to describe, we don't have to stand for it if we don't, want to. And there is space for us, and we have to use our voice in order to make sure that that space is accounted for.
I love that. That's absolutely true. And then the extra special thing I think about, like sharing very real raw aspects to our journeys and our training experiences, is that I think it would be very easy to look at you and your career and think, wow, you've just got it dialed in. Like it looks very glamorous. It looks very easy, because of the way that there are a lot of docs out there that we all look up to, and they make it look easy. They make it look glamorous without sharing some of like really what it took in terms of grit and perseverance to get there. And like all of the comments, the microaggressions, the discriminations, the macroaggressions that one can experience on this route.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think grit is a really important word. And I think it's something that like I've thought about a lot in my career, because there have been instances where I've like second guessed myself. I've wondered if I was cut out to do the things that I wanted to do. But I think that, something that sets apart people that end up getting to where they want to be versus people that, say, hey, maybe I don't want to try again is the grit. I don't think it's the intelligence. I don't think it's the capability. It's the fact that you're willing to pick yourself up and try again. And I think that's been kind of a theme in my journey to becoming an EM attending.
I love that so much. And, anytime that grit comes up in conversation, I feel inclined to ask, where do you get it from? Like, I think that the source of that grit is so variable for all of us. And so I'm always like trying to figure out, new ways to get it, ways to get more of it. I mean, if I could go back in time and maybe like learn some of those skills sooner, where would you say that yours comes from?
I would say it's multifactorial for me. I think, like I mentioned before, I have a really great social circle and a really great friendship group. My family's amazing. And a lot of times I've had to lean on them to, give me the perspective of, this isn't that big of a deal. Like you can try again. You are capable of doing this. And then sometimes it's me, being introspective and looking deep within myself and being like, all right, well, take 3 steps back. What else would you do in your life? Like, this is your dream. This is your passion. This is why you feel like you were placed on this earth. I've always wanted to help people, and I've always wanted to take care of people. And I can't think of a better way, no matter how like stressful it is. Sometimes the lows are like some of the lowest lows I've ever experienced, but the reward is so great and fulfilling for me that it's worth it.
Very well said. And what's interesting, as I am kind of, thinking through the framework that you are sharing with us, it's like that, those all sound like very healthy outlets for, us as physicians in terms of like, where do we look? Where do we find our center? Like, number one, it sounds like you are able to find it within yourself when you talk about the introspection, which is like phenomenal. Not all of us have that skill. I'm like the poster child of the surgeon, maybe without a center. But the other one is when you talk about your social support, which including family and, friends and things like that, I assume, because I know, not all of your family is in medicine. So your
Right.
strong social circle means interacting with people outside of the system itself.
Definitely. And I think it's really important to have that. Residency was like a very interesting social structure for me because it was a very small city where I trained. And, most of the people were in medicine. So I felt a lot of times I kind of lacked the balance of like, having perspectives of people outside of medicine and kind of understanding what's normal, what's not, like the lines between like professional life and personal life were kind of blurred. And I think those perspectives and those friends were very, very important because they understood me on a level, my co-residents, that I would not be able to explain to my, friends that weren't in medicine. But I also think that having, some of my best friends or, in tech and consulting, and the one's a dog walker, and like having those perspectives outside of the medical field and outside of the culture of what is residency was very, very helpful for me to like, ground myself and be able to advocate for myself sometimes.
Yeah, I think that the importance of that just cannot be understated because, again, like, I really look up to you. I just envy. I feel like you approach all of this in a very like calm, reasonable way. You have multiple sources that you can turn to that will help keep like this whole system in check internally and then externally with support outside of medicine. In contrast, I just want to always warn people against the fact that like, if you, or like me in a small program, or even coming out of medical school back then, like a lot of my friends were all also in medical school. And if something did go wrong, you guys know how students, young doctors just hype each other up. So like, a setback, often people aren't going to be like, oh my gosh, you're right, that's nothing. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, wow, like what was your score on that? That's crazy. This was my score. Could I get a score that low? And if so, like, would my life also be ruined? It's just an echo chamber, and often not one that can help you like find your true center. I'll even use the example of my husband and I talk about the fact that, he's not in medicine. We met at the end of medical school. If I had married a surgeon, I literally might be still in academic medicine, just operating 24/7, happy as a clam. And of course, not actually happy as a clam, but like maybe I would be blind to the fact that there are other ways to live and there are like other types of workplaces out there. I really wouldn't know if all my friends were also doctors and I was like married to a surgeon where it was normalized.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And I think what's unique about medicine is that it, especially in residency, it's not just a career. It ends up consuming your entire life because you're kind of at this point where you kind of have to prove yourself. You have to prove your worth. You're always being tested. You're always trying to show how dedicated you are by staying late or, working on this extra research project or this extra presentation. And without having someone else who, your husband probably helped bring you back to center sometimes and kind of help balance you a little bit. But without having those perspectives of like, hey, you can still be an amazing doctor and you can still really take amazing care of your patients and, really make an impact in your career, but you can also have joy in life and you can also have hobbies. You can also, work on bettering yourself in other ways without having to, sell your soul to the structure that I don't think propagates, a healthy mindset sometimes of, this is my career and this is part of who I am, but this isn't the entire me. Which, I feel like I'm still kind of working on, just finishing residency this year. I've found myself with a lot more free time than I've ever had before, because I feel like I've just been so laser focused on this goal of becoming a doctor. And now I'm like, all right, well, check, like that's great. And I'm having fun, but what else is there? What are the other sides of me that I want to explore? And it's been an interesting journey so far.
That's so great. And that really speaks to me too. Like I identify with you there because even when I started my attending job 3 years ago and, it was so awesome to hit the ground running and really build up the practice. But I am with you 100% where I was like, I have about 60 extra hours that just came out of nowhere. Like, and I think that it's such a great opportunity for growth. Like for me, I hope that I can look back at that and say, yeah, I did use it to grow. Like I used it to read again, learn a bunch of new skills, start some work I've always wanted to do as an artist, so I feel like I did take that and run with it all this extra time. But it's so interesting because I think that that's like something that probably most of us face at that often overlooked transition point of like the resident or the fellow going into the attending, like the thing that you've been promised and maybe working towards for a decade. Now it's happened. So there's this interesting, I don't know, for me, yes, there was a beautiful side to it, but I would almost describe it as an emptiness in that when I became an attending, I kind of looked around and I also added into the math equation what my 5-year residency took from me. And I was like, I feel like I've maybe been sold a false bill of goods here. And I felt an emptiness about it.
I can definitely relate to that. I think the first month after finishing residency, there were like some days that I didn't even leave my apartment because I was just like, I don't know what to do with my time. Like, I don't have any hobbies. I try to go to the gym and work out. What else? I moved to a new city. I didn't have friends yet. I was kind of in a little bit of a depression because I was like, all right, I have all this free time and I have nothing to do with it. And, I finally have some of the funds to be able to do, fun things, but I have nothing planned. And, it took some time. And I think anytime you move somewhere new and you're starting a new job, and regardless of whether it's medicine or not, it takes some adjustment. Things are getting better, but there was definitely a period where I felt really empty and I didn't know how to get out of it because I was like, do I pick up shifts? Like, is that going to make me feel fulfilled? Do I just like keep on grinding and working like I was when I was a resident? And for some people, maybe that's the answer. Maybe that is what makes them feel like completely whole. But for me, I have been working on trying to explore other parts of myself. I'm trying to learn how to snowboard. I have been traveling a bit. So I think that there is like possibility and potential for balance in medicine, but you just have to know what it is that your boundaries are and where you get the most satisfaction.
Absolutely. I just feel like it's maybe an important fact for young people to hear, like at some point training will be over. You'll have achieved the thing of becoming an attending, but we all give up things intentionally or not along the way. Like, I mean, there are sacrifices that I made totally consciously. And then there's the whole host of sacrifices that I made, unconsciously. And I just, I think people need to know the whole picture. Unfortunately, and this was like such a bummer when it didn't happen to me, you don't just become an attending and it's like a Disney fairy tale ending. Like all my problems are solved.
Yes. Did you feel like you had a lot of pressure to pursue a fellowship from your residency?
I feel like fortunately I didn't too much because we have a lot of graduates from my program who go into general ENT. I feel like the pressure to do a fellowship just came internally. Like I really grappled with that decision for a couple of years until, thank God, my husband finally like got through to me, because for years he'd hear me and I would just be like, am I ready to just give up and basically end my career and just roll over and die? That's what I thought not doing a fellowship was. That's like how much that I really try to impress upon people. That was the level I was disconnected from reality. I was like, basically, the end of a very short career, I guess. I'll just give up totally and not do a fellowship, even though like there wasn't a fellowship I was drawn to. And I did not want to work in academics, but I had so much shame and inability to even admit that I wouldn't want to be in academics, even though now, thankfully, and kudos to therapy and getting to know yourself better, like academics would never have been the right fit, but I would have kept trying to fit like a square peg into a round hole probably for the rest of my life if not for some like outside intervention?
Yeah, I can totally relate to the internal pressure of, feeling the need to pursue, like to get to the highest level, is kind of the way I thought about it in my head of like, all right, I've worked this hard. Like you might as well get to the highest level of your career. But that's similar to you. There wasn't really a fellowship that called to me as much as I feel like it called to others. And I felt guilty about that. Like I felt like I didn't care enough or something was, I was missing something for not wanting to pursue a fellowship. And I think it's, partially because I went to a super academic residency. I didn't feel like I had a lot of pressure from like leadership or anything to pursue a fellowship, but I felt like I put it on myself to.
And like peer pressure. If all of your co-residents are.
That's one thing that I feel like is not discussed enough in medicine, is how hard it is to be placed against other people in residency that have totally different skill sets from you, totally different interests from you. We all have our own strengths and, weaknesses, but I feel like there's this unspoken, measuring stick all the time of like, all right, this is how many patients this person saw. These are how many procedures this person has done. Like, where do you rank against the other people? And, maybe partially it is internal between us residents because we are kind of more competitive people and we've been kind of told that we're being kind of watched and evaluated at every shift. But I also think it's part of the culture of residency, which, I would love to see structures where we really embrace each individual's strengths and then comparing yourself to who you were maybe 2 or 3 years ago versus like comparing yourself to how you stand amongst your class.
Yes. Could not agree more. This is a culture of residency, a culture of medical education type of problem because, and for anyone who hasn't been a resident or experienced this, I so truly agree with you about this fact that the trainees are pitted against each other. That is really not only unnecessary, but I think kind of counterproductive if our end goal is to create a healthy, competent workforce that has longevity. So when I think back to my own journey, and I'd love to hear where this changed for you, but I know that like in medical school, especially those first 2 years where it was like small group case-based learning, and lecture format type of stuff, I did not feel that in any way that students were pitted against each other. That was like some of, I think, like my best memories of like, it was really fun to learn. I loved doing my homework, like studying for cases, prepping for cases, learning pathophysiology, anatomy type of stuff. Like, and I did not, sure, I felt some inner drive that I've had my whole life to like want to be the best and want to be like a teacher's pet and sit in the front row, center of the classroom. But, I did not feel like we were pitted against each other. And I feel like maybe starting clinicals on M3 is a little bit when everyone's going for AOA and people are like comparing themselves to other students. But I never felt it in a way that was like terrifying to me. And I think like very toxic until intern year of residency. And then I totally agree with you. Now, these like weird nerd scientists, many of whom have never spent time outside of a hospital their whole adult life, they have this like perfect human experiment where say now they have 3 new residents coming in. They have like a case and a control and they can like mess with all of them, pit them against each other. I mean, I've seen every version of it. Tell lies about some of them to the others, lie to other people about 2 out of the 3. I mean, like every version of it. And it's like psychological torture.
Yeah. And, some of the people that I've encountered in my career in medicine who look amazing on paper in terms of like their procedure numbers, their ability to see patients, their research publications, blah, 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 are the worst doctors I've ever met. And I think that is something that, I see it less in community medicine, but I see it more in academics where we continue to put these people on pedestals and, reward them for missing this part of medicine that I feel is the most important, which is being able to take care of people, rather than, make your CV or whatever look a certain way. And yeah, I think that was tough in residency because I did feel like it was, getting a certain number of publications or getting these opportunities were more rewarded than how you interacted with patients.
Totally. It is rewarded in academia to just be that certain type of way. I love the thought experiment. Like, it brings me joy to think about, like, those really super academic people, academic their whole career, bullies during residency. I don't think that they could do my job for one day in rural solo practice. I think that, like, the tough conversations with, patients without insurance, with insurance companies, with like other teams trying to coordinate care, with other teams in the hospital trying to get various therapy services covered for like a specific type of patient population, even going down to the level of putting in their own H&P for something. I mean, we had multiple attendings who could not put an order in and could not put an H&P in. So like all of this talk of saying, okay, what if from now on, if a resident had an emergent dental problem that they could have like an hour and a half off to go get a root canal or whatever it is, like maybe, especially in ENT, it's sad to think that we would let like a resident's teeth rot out of their head, an abscess or what have you. Well, the issue is, what if they were covering cases and you would say, well, that attending like should know how to do the case themselves. And it's like, maybe, first of all, even that's a maybe, because some attendings would cover cases that they weren't comfortable with unless they had a senior resident. Yeah. But then even more so, clerically, from an orders and notes standpoint, they couldn't do it without a resident. And it is funny. I think that there is this like real diversion between people who go out in the community versus stay protected in academics all the time. Because in the community, I mean, you do have to figure out and know how to do all these types of things yourself. Like I don't have a team of minions who follow me around and ask me how they can help 100 times a day.
Could not agree more. I feel like the growth that I've had between day one as an attending to who I am right now has been like exponential, like way more growth than my last, 2 years of residency. And that's because I had to figure it out myself. And, I was talking to one of my co-residents and one of my really good friends about this. It was like, we used to be like in awe of attendings who would carry 8 patients at a time in the ER. And I would, I'd be like, oh my gosh, how do they do that? Like I could never do this. And, they would have a resident, they would have a scribe, the resident's writing the note, the scribe or doing the orders and the scribe's writing the note, helping with, getting the HPI, doing procedures, blah, blah, blah. Now it's like I have 16 patients by myself at one time and I'm doing everything for all of them. And it's just funny to think about how I thought that I could never get to that point of being that type of doctor and like caring for that many people at one time, for better or for worse, but I can, and I did, and I figured it out because, that's where the growth happened for me, which was at the beginning of becoming an attending. And I still have a lot more growth to go, but I do feel like it's really pushed me in my career to be on my own and have to figure it out on my own.
That's awesome. Well, one thing that I specifically wanted to make sure that, we take some time and dive into is, of course, the experience of being, one, a minority in medicine, and also, two, a young woman. And certainly, like, we've talked a lot on this show about the experience of the young woman who enters medical or surgical training. And I think that there's enough evidence in the literature, there's enough anecdotal word getting around that it's not necessarily the same experience as what young men encounter, especially if they're not minorities going into medicine, and I'd just love to know like about any times where that became like acutely obvious to you during your training and different ways that you handled it. And most importantly, ways that we can like help other people navigate it in this next generation.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I do agree, it's not the same experience. Where I went to residency, I was definitely a minority, and I didn't really think too much about it. And it did come up a couple of times, being a woman, being a minority, being smaller than my co-residents, which when I was in medical school, I never thought that would be, something that people highlighted or something that people would like bring up in a conversation, but it really like affected my self-confidence, and it affected like my ability to believe in myself for doing certain things. I had one time where I had an attending kind of single me out and say that, you're going to have to adjust because you are very, very small. And I was like, okay, I'm like 5'4". I'm not like the smallest thing ever, which is fine. Even if I was, it doesn't like preclude you from doing emergency medicine. But I think their point was, like you're going to have to adjust your procedures. You're going to have to adjust the height of the bed and like make sure that you are just aware of like you have a disadvantage.
Disadvantage. Well, it's just funny because disadvantage is like maybe in the eye of the beholder, because I have to adjust the bed all the time. I was just in the emergency room cranking it up to 6 foot tall height, and it is funny because have you heard the saying, as a woman you're always too young or too old because the right age is when you're a man? I kind of suspect that it's the same for heights, like 5'4", 6 foot, like are both bad heights for women, because the right height is when you're a man.
That is such a good way to put it. And maybe it does affect my career a little bit, like with reductions and stuff like that for dislocations, but I don't think that singling someone out in front of a group or like singling someone out and talking to them in that way like perpetuates a culture where like I feel capable of doing the things that I'm meant to do. So that was one instance, and the way that I sort of worked through that was just, talking to my friends, family, like looking back at the successes that I had in terms of procedures and in terms of being able to do my job, because I had never been like told that, my height was ever an issue in the past. And it affected me for a while, but I got over it. And now I feel like I do think about it sometimes. And, my first patient as an attending thought I was a medical student. And I'm sure that you have talked to other female doctors that, they walk into the room, they have a badge that says doctor on it, they have a white coat, they have whatever, and they're like, oh, the doctor never showed up, or, the nurse was in here, or whatever you want to say. That happens to me probably on a daily basis with either patients or like, if I'm new in a hospital, then other staff, which, you can't like get mad at people for assuming something, but internally, like, does it affect you? 100%. It does. Like you've worked so hard to get to this point. Like this is your dream. You want to be able to do the best you can for these people that are in front of you, and they don't even think that you're the person that they're looking for. Like it does hurt. And I think that the only way to kind of improve that culture is by speaking up, and is by, respectfully correcting people, not being afraid to be who you are in the force. Like I've had comments at work by other female residents who are like, oh, like you wear makeup to your shift. And I'm like, yeah, I wear makeup every day. Like, what is the problem? Does that bother you? Like, does that make you feel bad that I like want to show up for myself and respect myself and this is how I feel good? Like those little microaggressions of like being feminine, being, you know, having boundaries, wanting to be respected at work. I don't think that they will go away unless you like speak up and stand up for what you will tolerate. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And for right now, you know, those things, having boundaries at work, respecting yourself at work, like, you know, I love it. You don't need to convince me of those things, but right now in the current medical education, you know, hospital culture, those are revolutionary things. Like those are too big of asks. Depending on, I would say in most teams, if you try to state these things or ask for these things, it would be considered like a revolutionary act. And that's because all these types of things are revolutionary acts until they're normalized, until they're accepted, like, and adopted into a culture. But I really, you know, I agree with you. I just think that the older that I get, the more that I can see that, like, for some of our, especially like white male counterparts, the two looks that they can have at work are like, they look very good, like you're looking sharp today, guy, or they can look tired, but that gets spun into, you've been working really hard, guy. You know, like, and it just, but I agree with you. With women, it's kind of a minefield because wearing makeup gets often a lot of pejorative comments, not wearing makeup, a lot of pejorative comments. I will say that in my, and because I will, like, you know, I hate that you got those types of comments about makeup because absolutely, like, and I will tell you, you know, I should say for the record, you look like a doctor to me. I wouldn't, and that's because maybe I'm like, maybe I have normalized, like, this is what doctors can look like. Mm-hmm. You look like a doctor to me. The more that people like you are doing interviews and putting themselves out there and like, hey, like, I'm just a very badass EM attending. Like, what's up? And then people see and experience that. Then they're like, okay, perfect. Like Dr. Matin, like this is what a doctor looks like. I will say that the 2 times ever that I got like a PSN, which is a patient safety network. It's where like you get reported for endangering a patient in the hospital. And if anyone has worked in a hospital, they know that these are usually like anonymous bullying systems. But the 2 times I got written up, both times I actually had high heels on. Which I think is so funny. Like, and I'm 6 feet flat, so in my heels, which I would only wear for like grand rounds, or that means, you know, that there was an extenuating circumstance because I was not wearing them for fun because I was in the hospital. So, but I was like 6'4" in both cases, so like semi dressed up, had heels on, rounding, and those were the 2 times I got PSN'd. And both times, like the tone of the PSN, you know, without going into it because it's just getting in the weeds, it was like, wow, you really think you're hot shit. Like, we need to take you down a peg. And so my way of coping with that was to like just never do that again, like never wear heels again. I wear gym shoes and very baggy scrubs, and I shuffle around. Like, I've pretty much changed my gait, I would say, post residency to like reflect like, nope, this is just like a dejected lady. Like, nothing to look at here. Don't report her for anything. Like, she's not doing anything. She has like no will to live. Just like leave this girl alone. Cause I will tell you, the second that I wear heels, put on nice makeup, if God forbid, if I was wearing something that didn't fit me like a garbage bag, which is how these standard scrubs fit, I legitimately think it would attract more trouble for me. And I can point to multiple instances where that's been the case in the past.
And I think that there's so many women that have a similar story to that. When I was 14, I did a science fair project And like, I had worked so hard on this project, and I was presenting it at a regional science fair. And I had like it was not like dressy by any means. I had like slacks on and a blue shirt that had like a blue blouse that was like silvery or something. And I remember this judge, they like completely destroyed me. They were like, no questions about my project at all. They were like, what do you think this is? And I was like, what do you mean? Mind you, I'm 14 years old, a little girl. And they were like, do you think this is a fashion show? And I was like, what? Like, and I had my whole presentation ready for like to present my project. I was just like, I didn't even know what to say. They're like, do you think that this is a fashion show? Like, do you think that you're a model? And I was like, no, I don't know. And they were like, you don't need to be dressed up like this for a science fair. And it was another woman. And it was just like, I was crying for hours. Like, I went home, my family like didn't know how to console me. I was just like, what the hell did I do wrong? Like, I got dressed up because I was excited to dress professionally as a 14-year-old girl, like, you know, excited for the project that I had worked like hours to present, and then like months before that to even prepare for. And the person didn't even give me the time of day. And, you know, now I'm not going to apologize for myself ever, because like, I know who I am. I know what my intentions are. And I know that I have good intentions and good boundaries, and I respect myself. And if someone wants to misconstrue that, that's their problem. It's not my problem. So I think that that's kind of what's changed in my life and my career from like going through things like that. And I know I'm not the only woman, and I know I'm not like the only person that's had these sorts of experiences, which I think is why it's so important to me to speak up.
I'm so sorry that happened to you, you know, when you were 14. That's a heartbreaking story, because yeah, I can picture like that kid and an excited 14-year-old, and to be cut down like that at a STEM event, like, you know, who knows what it was. It just might have been that, I mean, it's even weirder because you're just a kid in that scenario. So I can't even get in the headspace of this judge, but maybe like shimmer, you know, directly offended her. It's crazy. And I like your takeaway point, because it reminds me of one of my favorite books, The Courage to Be Disliked, which really, it boils down to, what is my task? So for instance, if I wear a shirt that has like a slight shimmer to it, it's still a professional cut. Like, my aren't out. Like, you know, it's professional by all standards and cuts, but it's like a little shimmery. And somebody at work takes offense to that. That's their response to my shirt, is their task. My tasks are get dressed in the morning, not have my out at work, like not have my stuff out at work. Right. My task is to show up to work, you know, like in a good headspace to where I could do a good job and complete my tasks at work. Like, those are my tasks. Whereas how this person perceives my shirt, that is just straight up not my task. It's theirs. And so I feel like, you know, it sounds like you do a good job of identifying what is your task and not. And it literally opens up your whole life to be good at doing this, because all of that extra time and energy and running on the hamster wheel of like, does this person like my shirt? Why don't they like my shirt? What was offensive about my shirt? It's not your task. And you can really like lighten your cognitive load by realizing that.
Yeah. And I will say it's not easy, you know, at the beginning. Like, I've had instances where like, you know, I've had like people that were senior to me, like touch me inappropriately, like have different connotations to the way that they were talking to me. And the fear of reprimand and the fear of like consequences for speaking up is real. And I think that those things are more accepted in residency than they are in other fields, which is really unfortunate. And, you know, there have been instances where I didn't speak up and I didn't say anything because I was like, all right, like, what benefit is it going to have for me? Like, the only consequence I see is that people are going to see me differently. And then there have been instances where I'm like, all right, but I don't want this to happen to anyone else. And there's going to be a girl that like this happens to, and they're not going to speak up, and it's going to like destroy them, you know, mentally, and it's going to be hard for them to work. And, you know, it's definitely affecting me because I'm thinking about it all the time. So, you know, I should do something, just like it's the right thing to do, you know? And that's been hard because you're right. It does take your cognitive load away from what you're there to do, which is to take care of patients and to, you know, be a doctor and do the best you can. And I think that those kinds of things, when they happen, are really unfortunate because we have all this data that shows that women make amazing doctors, sometimes even better than men. And we should create a space for them. And it should be a place where they can be feminine and they can be, you know, also tough, and they can be smart, and they can be academic, and whatever it is they want to be, because that diversity is what makes the medical workforce strong.
Very well said. And that diversity also, by the way, reflects the diversity of our patients and, you know, our patient population. So yes, not only is there all that data about like female physicians, but the care that female patients receive is improved from female physicians, you know, depending on which study that you look at. So I think that, I guess I would love to know, you know, you touched on something that's very tough, like that's very challenging, because you touched on inappropriate, you know, physical contact, really, like with a resident. And, you know, notwithstanding all the things that you mentioned that we want for residents, which is that they have the ability to, you know, feel safe and comfortable and supported at work, but they should also be learning, by the way, like it literally impacts our education when things like this occur during residency. But I guess I would just love to know, you know, when you experience something like that, you know, how you handled it in the aftermath, and any pearls that you have for trainees, because sadly, I don't think that you are the first or last person to experience that type of like unwanted physical contact as a resident.
Yeah, that is true. Initially when it happened, I was just like in shock. Like, I didn't even do anything. I didn't say anything. It was like, what happened was that there was an attending that put his hands over my hands while I was on the computer. And the first time I was very uncomfortable with it, and I moved my hand away. And it happened a couple more times where his hand was on top of mine on the mouse, like moving the mouse around. And it just made me feel very uncomfortable. And it's sad because the second time that it happened, I just kind of froze. Like, I didn't even know, I didn't move my hand away or anything. I was just like, what is going on? And then, you know, it was a brief situation. I thought about it for a while. I was like, this made me feel not comfortable. No one's ever done that to me at work before. Like, I wouldn't do that to anybody else.
No.
And, you know, I had those thoughts of like, what if this happens to somebody else? What if it happens to a girl that like it destroys or something? Or what if something worse happens? I don't know. And I had the fear of, all right, well, if I, you know, bring it up and people are like, all right, it's not really a big deal. It's not much, relax. Then I'm going to look like I'm too sensitive, or I'm too this, or I'm too that. And it took me a while to build up the courage to say, hey, that's a boundary for me. Like, touching me like that is a boundary. And I don't want to be at work worrying about when someone's going to do that next. And I don't want this to happen to anyone else. So those were my reasons for reporting it. And the behavior changed. Like the next time that I worked with this person, it was very professional. It was very, just about work. And I was proud of myself for doing it, because there had been instances before, and I'm sure other women, not even medicine, but just other professional women in the workforce have to go through things like this, where there's just, there's just a lack of respect. And when you respect yourself and you know what you deserve, you should stand up for yourself. And when you do, you'll feel a lot better, because I feel like I did. And I kind of decided that even if there were consequences, it's better than not saying anything at all. And yeah, it was worth it for me.
Wow. That's very powerful. And I absolutely think that you could have saved like multiple other trainees, future docs, like the same fate. I think that if people are trying to sort through something they experienced at work and they're wondering, how inappropriate it was or not, because we all can like second guess ourselves or say, well, am I maybe being, I don't know, especially like, and I will say during my residency, everything became so chaotic and crazy. I really did not trust myself. I couldn't tell like what was a big deal or not anymore, because I was so over threshold, for so long. But when I, listened to what you had to experience, which I hate that you did, it sounds like you handled it. It got knocked out like pretty professionally, handled very well, which I think is great. Like that's a great reflection of maybe how things like that are handled at that center. But when I think about it, it's just that would my male co-resident have experienced the same thing? And literally, so as I'm running that through like the simulator in my mind, I'm like, can I picture this male attending doing that to like a male resident? I cannot. I've never seen that. I've never seen a
female attending doing it to a male resident.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen that either, although it may be inappropriate touching if something like that happened. But for sure, like, can I picture, this like, yeah, I can't picture it. I don't think that they would do it. So the fact that maybe their behavior, their body language changes because you are a petite woman working the same job, that really like kind of fails, I think, the comparison test.
Yeah, I think it probably does happen to male residents, but I think with less frequency, because I think women have less, if it is like woman on man, it could be different. But I think that there's less agency for women to behave this way at work, because we're scrutinized so much that we have to be more professional. Like we have to be like completely perfect. Otherwise, if we step out of line in one way, there's like all of these comments and judgments and criticisms about who you are at your core as a doctor, rather than, like one little mistake that would be perceived by your male counterpart.
Totally, million% agree. I think in the literature that, we see that even when it comes to things like medical error, which are unfortunately, they're unavoidable to an extent, the fact that physicians are human and that they can err, the way that like medical error is responded to and handled at the physician level, and also like in terms of how patients perceive it from physicians, it's much less forgiving towards women. I know a lot of male surgeons who have all sorts of unusual surgical complications, and it's just written off as, well, he operates a lot. Bound to happen, right? But if a woman had that same complication, it would be like catastrophic. So I totally agree with you. Even something like this, like maybe a report of inappropriate touching in the workplace. I think that for a guy and for a lot of guys, it's just like, okay, well, it's not really a pattern. That might have been him being unusually friendly that day. Yeah, just like in a good mood that day. Whereas like with the woman, they're like, well, we already weren't going to promote you to, full-time clinical professor, and now we definitely won't because of some weird touching that you're doing. Like it's just, I mean, these systems and the cycles definitely perpetuate themselves. And I really appreciate you, of course, kicking around some of these ideas with me, because, I think that both of us, we are relatively early career attendings. We're just figuring things out. But like at the same time, kudos to us, because it's not easy becoming an attending, and it's not easy becoming an attending as a female minority. So I do think that, for us and everyone out there like us, it's time to find our voices and, use them, because it's not like we have nothing helpful to add or contribute to these conversations until we're 50.
Right. I agree. And I love this platform that you've built to be able to discuss these things.
So for my final question, I love asking everybody, do you believe in karma?
100%. I do. And I've seen it in my life many times where, someone has done someone else wrong. And then later on in life, it's like, wow, you didn't even have to do anything. Like, people get what they deserve. So I do.
Adiba, thank you so much for joining me today and being an inspiration to myself and all of us who are working towards creating a more equitable future in healthcare. Where can our listeners find and connect with you online?
They can follow me on Instagram at Adiba Matin.
Wonderful. Follow me on Instagram at francismay.md and at Rethinking Residency. Visit my website, rethinkingresidency.com, to learn more about resident physician stories and ways that residents can most effectively navigate the game of residency. And check out my new show, Surgeon Interrupted, launching in spring 2025. This will be the final episode of Promising Young Surgeon. Be well and take care of one another.